Imagine this. You're the man holding a regime's absolute darkest secrets. You've survived decades of cutthroat politics, assassinations, and war. So why do you suddenly decide that your final secret will be your own violent death? We're not doing a dry history lesson today. We are stepping straight into a dark, gritty investigation into the sudden, explosive end of the Middle East's most feared power broker. Welcome to The Explainer.
Seriously, think about the psychology here. You spend literally decades building an impenetrable shadow empire. You're controlling whole nations, surviving literal wars, outmaneuvering hitmen. You were the ultimate survivor. So why, on a totally ordinary Wednesday morning, do you turn a gun on yourself? Or, and this is a real question, did someone else pull the trigger? To even begin to understand the eerie, paranoid mystery of the Syrian Mukhabarat, their sprawling intelligence apparatus, we've got to look at its ultimate enforcer, a man named Ghazi Kanaan.
Okay, let's dive into this. Picture the scene. It's October 12, 2005. Ghazi Kanaan, the Syrian interior minister, calls into the Voice of Lebanon radio station. He's furious. He vehemently denies these explosive accusations that he took bribes from the recently assassinated Lebanese prime minister, Rafik al-Hariri. And then, he drops this incredibly chilling line. He says, "I believe this is the last statement that I can make." Less than an hour later, a single gunshot rings out in his Damascus office. Just like that, the man who ruled the shadows was gone. But to figure out exactly how he met his end, we have to rewind and trace his bloody rise to the top.
Part 1. Rise from the Shadows. So our story starts in 1942 in Bamra. It's a small village really close to the hometown of future Syrian president Hafez al-Assad. Now this geographic detail matters because Kanaan shared Assad's Alawite roots. That's the minority sect that eventually came to totally dominate Syria's ruling class. Kanaan climbs the military ranks fast. He trains at the Homs Military Academy, fights the Israelis on the Golan Heights in the 70s, and quickly proves himself to be this fiercely capable, honestly pugnacious commander. By 1982, his military pedigree and his absolute unwavering loyalty perfectly aligned with Hafez al-Assad's grand vision, and that earns him a massive promotion, military intelligence chief in Lebanon.
Now, what's really interesting about this ecosystem is just how terrifying it actually was. The Syrian Mukhabarat wasn't some unified, streamlined government body. No way. It was 4 overlapping, intensely competitive intelligence branches. You had military intelligence, Air Force intelligence, political security, and general intelligence. The regime deliberately engineered it this way so that no single agency could ever get too powerful. It was a completely paranoid, cutthroat environment where agencies watched the citizens, yeah, but mostly they watched each other. And it was exactly in this toxic ecosystem of constant espionage and suspicion that Ghazi Kanaan absolutely thrived.
Which brings us to part 2, the kingmaker of Lebanon.
Look, what Kanaan had wasn't just political influence. It was sheer, unchecked dominance. For 20 years, from 1982 to 2002, Kanaan basically ran Lebanon as a de facto client state for Damascus. He operated out of this notorious headquarters in Aanjar, and he was ruthless. He systematically sabotaged the 1983 Israel-Lebanon agreement just to guarantee Syrian regional hegemony. He played absolute puppet master with rival Christian militia leaders, guys like Eli Hobeika and Samir Geja, forging these shadowy alliances. He literally intimidated politicians into making Elias Hrawi the president. Oh, and when the Taif agreement demanded he redeploy 35,000 Syrian troops, he just flat out refused. The guy was the undisputed kingmaker.
And to really give you a sense of his hands-on operational power, you have to hear this wild anecdote from the source material. In 2002, Kanaan wasn't just barking orders from a cushy desk. He personally, literally personally, escorted a convoy delivering 3 rockets to Hezbollah, right across the Syria-Lebanon border. This wasn't some desk jockey bureaucrat. This was a hardcore enforcer who was more than willing to get his hands dirty to maintain his grip on a shadow empire.
And this brilliantly illustrates the staggering duality of his control. Check this out. If you were a soldier in the official Lebanese armed forces and you needed a standard weapon permit, that permit required Ghazi Kanaan's personal signature to be valid. But at the exact same time, militant shadow proxies like Hezbollah couldn't execute their military operations without giving Kanaan prior notification. So what's the takeaway here? True power is holding the leash of the state and the state's enemies at the exact same time. He had the official military apparatus locked down in one hand, and he was pulling the strings of illicit, off-the-books militias with the other.
Part 3, a shifting regime.
Things start changing fast. Hafez al-Assad has died, and his son, Bashar, takes power. In 2002, Kanaan hands over his Lebanese portfolio and heads back to Damascus to become chief of the Political Security Directorate.
2 years later, boom, he's promoted to Interior Minister. Now, on paper, these look like massive, incredible promotions. But actually, returning home put him right smack in the middle of fierce internal regime rivalries. He almost immediately finds himself sidelined by the new intelligence supremo, a guy named Asef Shawkat. And Shawkat just so happens to be the new president's brother-in-law. The old guard warrior was rapidly losing his grip on the shadows.
Part 4. The walls close in.
Let's move to 2005 and see how this pressure cooker really builds. The walls start closing in fast. In February, former Lebanese Prime Minister Rafik al-Hariri is assassinated in a massive explosion. This triggers a massive, hard-hitting UN probe led by Detlef Melis. And honestly, given Kanaan's iron-fisted control over Lebanon, the investigators naturally point their spotlight right at him. Then, a few months later in June, the U.S. Treasury slaps Kanaan with a specially designated national label. They freeze all his assets to financially isolate him as a quote-unquote bad actor supporting terrorism. So now he is completely squeezed. He's got international UN investigators breathing down his neck for a murder, and Washington systematically dismantling his financial empire.
Which brings us to the climax. Part 5. A state suicide?
Let's treat this final day like a true crime timeline, because the chaotic final hours are just unbelievable. It's the morning of October 12th. Kanaan is on the radio. He sounds completely lucid, fiercely defending his legacy in Lebanon, absolutely denying he ever took checks from Hariri. And that's when he drops that chilling last statement we talked about. Just 1 hour later, his assistant hears a faint noise. He walks into the office and finds the Major-General lying on the floor behind his desk. He's still breathing. There's a pistol in his hand. By the afternoon, after being rushed to the hospital, he dies, and the Syrian government immediately, officially declares it a suicide.
The forensic details we get from the Syrian Attorney General are incredibly stark, just raw facts. The weapon found at the scene was Kanaan's personal .38 caliber Smith & Wesson revolver. The cause of death? A single gunshot to the mouth. It is a deeply violent, deeply definitive end for a man who spent his entire life operating in the literal crosshairs of regional warfare.
So the crucial point is, we have to look at these two vastly different narratives and weigh them neutrally based on our sources. On one side, you have the official Syrian state verdict, a straightforward suicide. The story of a man who perhaps just buckled under immense media and international pressure. But then, on the other side, you have the doubters. Prominent figures like Lebanese MP Gibran Toueni instantly rejected the suicide narrative. Their argument? They claim this was a state suicide, basically a forced elimination to permanently silence a guy who simply knew way too much. The theory is that the regime turned him into a convenient dead scapegoat for the Hariri assassination right before that massive UN report was scheduled to drop.
And you know, the clues didn't stop at the crime scene. Let's look at the funeral. Kanaan's body is transported back to his birthplace of Bramra in an ambulance covered in flowers. It's attended by senior military officials, sure, but look closely at this one specific detail. The Syrian flag was notably absent from his coffin. Now, for a man who spent his entire life as the ultimate, die-hard, patriotic enforcer of the regime's foreign policy, that missing flag is a glaring, eerie sign of disrespect. It speaks volumes about exactly where his standing was with the regime at the exact moment he died.
Which leaves us with this totally lingering, provocative question. Was Ghazi Kanaan just a tragic loyalist? Was he just a man who saw his sprawling shadow empire crumble and chose to end it all on his own terms under the crushing weight of shifting political tides? Or was the ultimate regime enforcer permanently, violently silenced by his own paranoid ecosystem, taken out before UN investigators could uncover his and the regime's final, darkest secrets? What do you think? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope diving into this dossier helps shed some light on some of the darkest corners of history.